For years, humanity has been peaceful, cooperative, humble. They joined the Galactic Council quietly, offered help, signed every agreement, until suddenly they stopped. Without warning, Earth begins to refuse every new treaty. Trade pacts, peace accords, defense coalitions, all rejected. The galaxy scrambles to understand why, and what they uncover terrifies them. Earth didn't lose faith in the Council. Earth finally understood the game, and they're choosing to stand alone. The galaxy was not held together by peace. It was held together by paper, agreements, contracts, non-aggression clauses, trade pacts, arbitration terms, pages and pages of wording so carefully crafted it could take lifetimes just to read the footnotes. This was the Treaty Age, an era defined not by unity, but by obligation, where no species trusted each other fully. So they trusted the system that told them when they were allowed to act. It worked, or at least, it kept things quiet. No one fired first, but everyone was always preparing to. And into this tangled nest of caution and compromise came humanity. They didn't arrive with fleets, didn't claim territory, didn't posture or grandstand. They came with questions. They studied, listened, translated, and when they were finally offered a seat at the table, they accepted it without hesitation. Some species called them naive, too trusting, too eager. But Earth just smiled, signed every document, joined every committee, agreed to every condition, because humans had seen treaties before, and they knew what to look for. They weren't playing to win. They were playing to learn. For decades, Earth was the ideal member. Reliable, helpful, predictable. They mediated disputes, built infrastructure, sent relief to disaster zones before aid was even requested. And through it all, they signed everything. They aligned with the Joint Defense Grid. They joined the Cooperative Resource Accord. They even agreed to planetary sovereignty waivers, something no other young species had ever risked. And they never hesitated. Not once. Other members came to rely on them, to expect their signature on every major agreement. Because if Earth agreed, others would follow. That's how much trust they had earned. One council diplomat even said, "The Terrans are glue, quiet, soft-spoken glue holding the whole structure together." No one saw the pattern, because no one was looking. They didn't notice the subtle pauses before each agreement. The way Earth always asked for time to review. The way they never led the treaty, but always supported it. Until one day, they didn't. It was supposed to be routine. Another treaty, another agreement, another carefully worded document from the Galactic Council. This one was important, but not unusual. A joint strategic defense pact. The idea was simple. If one member world came under threat, the others would respond. Not out of charity, but as obligation. A collective shield. One signed clause at a time. It had been months in the making. Every major power had signed it. The final signature needed Earth's. No one doubted it would come. They'd signed everything else. Always had. Always did. But the day passed. No signature. 2 days. 3. Council envoys reached out. No answer. Messages. Requests for clarification. Press channels opened. Still nothing. Until day 6. A single communication. From Earth. One sentence. "We decline." That was all. No explanation. No revision. No suggestion of compromise. Just 2 words. And the silence that followed hit harder than any battle could have. The council chamber paused. Not because it was a problem, treaty refusals happened. But not from Earth. They had never refused anything. Never broken stride. Never missed a step in the endless, careful dance of interstellar diplomacy. Until now. And it wasn't a delay. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. The treaty authors reached out. Sent revisions. Offered concessions. Earth declined again. Politely. Firmly. And then said nothing more. It shook the chamber. Because if Earth wouldn't sign this treaty, one designed to protect all species from external aggression, what else would they say no to? The news spread. Fast. Subspace chatter lit up with theories. Some claimed Earth was pulling away. Others said they had built a secret fleet and no longer needed the Council. Some believed Earth was making a play for independence, strategic leverage. But the most unnerving theory came from the quietest voice in the room. a Zalari archivist who had studied Terran diplomatic patterns for 30 years, stood in the corner of a treaty review board and said, "They're not posturing. They've just stopped believing in us." It didn't make sense. Earth had never shown ambition, never flexed strength, never demanded leadership roles or regional control. So why now? What had changed? The next vote came 2 weeks later. A trade recalibration pact between 20 border worlds. Simple logistics. Mutual profit. Again, Earth was expected to sign. Again, they didn't. No reason. No delay. Just another quiet response. "We will not be participating." Panic began to spread behind closed doors. Because it wasn't just refusal. It was calculated withdrawal. Not from the galaxy. From the system. Earth wasn't isolating. They still responded to aid requests. Still sent relief missions. Still honored prior obligations. But anything new? Anything built from the treaty machine? They declined. Every time. No rage. No protests. Just firm, measured silence. And one by one, the other species began to ask the question no one wanted to say out loud. What does Earth know that we don't? It didn't happen all at once. That's what scared them the most. Because if Earth had made demands, if they'd burned a flag or walked out of the council, the galaxy would have known how to respond. But this was slower, colder. It started with missed signatures, then delayed responses, then entire negotiations where Earth simply didn't show up. No threats, no broadcasts, no ultimatums. They just stopped participating. And that was enough. Because Earth's signature wasn't just symbolic. It was stabilizing. Every treaty they'd signed over the decades had carried quiet weight. Because humans didn't gain anything by signing. They never demanded reparations or territory. Never exploited loopholes or forced amendments. They signed because they believed in the system. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Now, Earth was absent, and treaties began to fracture. One border pact lost 3 signatures after Earth stepped away. 2 trade routes were abandoned when Terran freighters rerouted through independent space, without explanation. A planetary reclamation charter collapsed when 20 smaller species withdrew support after Earth's silence. Because without Terran backing, the whole thing felt untrustworthy. The Council scrambled to respond. They scheduled new summits, rewrote key articles, introduced oversight measures designed to bring Earth back into the fold. But it was already too late. The galaxy had started asking the real question. Why is Earth saying no? And worse, were they right to? Analysts poured through decades of archives. They started seeing patterns, agreements forced through with hidden clauses, power blocks shifting beneath the surface, resources redirected under the pretense of fairness. And Earth had signed it all, quietly, willingly, until now. One internal report leaked from a Trade Compliance Commission simply read, "The Terrans never agreed because they were naive. They agreed because they were watching. And now that they had seen enough, they'd opted out, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because they understood something the rest of the galaxy was just beginning to realize. The treaties were not peace. They were management, tools used to keep things appearing fair, without ever being just. And Earth had learned that the only way to fix a broken system was to walk away from it, quietly, completely, and without permission. When words failed, the galaxy turned to history. They wanted to understand why Earth, of all species, was turning its back on the very treaties it once helped shape. So they went looking, not in Terran embassies, not in council records, in the past, in the archives no one read anymore. The old reports, the ones filed quietly decades ago, during Earth's first contact period. They found silence, and then stories. Stories that made sense in a way no broadcast ever could. Earth's history wasn't filled with victory. It was filled with betrayal. Treaties signed with empires that later burned cities. Accords made in good faith, then twisted into chains. Time and again, Earth had watched systems built on peace become mechanisms of control. They had survived alliances that turned into invasions. Watched coalitions become tools for exploitation. Seen hopeful documents become the blueprints for slow, grinding domination. But Earth didn't forget, because Earth wrote everything down, not in policy briefs, in blood. They taught in schools. Not as shame, as warning. They taught what happened when governments sacrificed liberty for temporary safety. What happened when people trusted words more than actions. What happened when the signature at the bottom of a treaty held more power than the people it affected. One council archivist, after reviewing 300 years of Terran history, closed her files and said, they didn't stop believing in peace. They stopped believing in documents that pretend to protect it. Earth had watched the galaxy do the same things. Slowly, carefully, peace accords passed with hidden exceptions. Trade deals that disproportionately favored council power blocks. Defense pacts that required temporary sacrifices of sovereignty. And Earth didn't object. Not once. They signed. They smiled. They studied. And then, when they knew enough, they quietly stepped away. Not to punish. To avoid repeating their own history. Because they recognized the signs. Not in the language of the treaties. In the tone. The galaxy heard cooperation. Earth heard control. The difference was everything. And when they realized the council system was headed in the same direction Earth had once barely survived, they didn't sound the alarm. They just left the room. Because humans don't need to win a debate. They've already lived through the answer. And they'd rather walk alone than be led quietly back into a cage with a golden lock. It was called the Unity Summit, the largest diplomatic gathering in over a century. Every major council member present, 12 neutral observers, 4 unaligned powers, 187 species in total. And at the center of it all, an empty chair. For Earth, they'd invited humanity directly, personally, publicly. There was no demand, no pressure, just one line. Please, speak. For a time, Earth said nothing. Then, on the day of the summit, the chair wasn't empty anymore. A single representative arrived. Not a warlord, not a general, not even a high diplomat. She was calm, middle-aged, unarmed. Her name was not listed in the council directory. And yet, when she walked in, the chamber fell quiet. Because she didn't carry herself like someone seeking approval. She carried herself like someone who already knew what she was going to say. They gave her the floor. She took a moment, stood in silence, then spoke quietly. You've asked us to explain why we stopped signing, why we've walked away from your treaties, your compacts, your defenses. It's simple. We don't believe in peace written by pressure. Some murmured. Others frowned. She continued. For decades, we signed everything you gave us. We gave resources, aid, manpower. We never demanded a seat at the top. We never asked for compensation. We signed because we believed, because we hoped. She looked around the chamber. Her voice did not rise. And we watched. We watched deals brokered in backrooms. Watched your defensive alliances quietly become surveillance. Watched the language change from mutual cooperation to strategic obligation. You didn't build peace. You built a market. The room stiffened. She didn't stop. You offered Earth leadership roles now, but only after we walked away. You offered us autonomy, but only after you sensed the center shifting. You didn't want partnership. You wanted our signature. She stepped away from the podium, and her final words landed like stone. We will not be bound by systems that only value us when we are quiet. If we are needed, we will stand. But we will not be owned. She left the room in silence. No further statement. No questions taken. No negotiation. And Earth issued no follow-up. Not a press release. Not a translation. Because nothing else needed to be said. And that's when the council realized. They didn't lose Earth. They never had it to begin with. They had assumed participation meant trust. That agreement meant loyalty. But Earth had only ever signed because they believed it might work. And when it didn't, they walked. Not in rage. In clarity. The council assumed Earth would stand alone. That no other species would follow. That the old alliances were too deep. Too profitable. Too ingrained. They were wrong. Because the moment Earth stepped back, others stepped forward. Quiet ones. Small worlds. Nations whose voices had been drowned out for decades. They didn't make speeches. Didn't threaten secession. They simply did what Earth had done. They said no. No to mandatory patrol routes. No to resource quotas. No to new arbitration treaties that only seemed to protect the powerful. And like Earth, it didn't shout. They just stopped signing. It started with 1, then 5, then a dozen. A slow bleed of belief. Because Earth had done something no one expected. They had proven it was possible to walk away and survive. More than survive. Thrive. Earth's economy didn't collapse. Its fleets weren't shut out. Its people didn't suffer. They adapted. They rerouted trade through independent exchanges, established direct diplomatic ties outside the Council's control, and made every agreement voluntary. No pressure, no obligation, just trust, earned the hard way. And others noticed. Species that had never dared raise their voice began rerouting their own diplomacy through Earth's new channels. Informal alliances, open-ended agreements, partnerships without coercion. And those partnerships worked. No fines, no forced compliance, just results. Because when deals are made by choice, not fear, they tend to hold. Meanwhile, inside the Council, the cracks spread. Panic in the trade assembly, delays in enforcement rulings, defense pacts left unanswered as more members abstained. The system had been built like a tower, each treaty stacked on the one before it, and Earth had pulled out the wrong brick. Not at the bottom, but the center. Not because they were the most powerful, but because they were the most trusted. And trust, once lost, doesn't come back with paperwork. One council ambassador finally said aloud what the room feared most. If they don't need our protection, and they don't need our commerce, what exactly do they need us for? There was no answer, because Earth had exposed a flaw. The treaties were never meant to unite. They were meant to control. And now that Earth had walked away, others remembered what it felt like to choose their own future. And they liked how it sounded. It was unprecedented. A full rewrite. Not an amendment. Not a patchwork revision. The Council scrapped the entire framework. They called it the New Accord. Drafted in haste. Approved in desperation. But it was good. No sovereignty waivers. No automatic enforcement. Every agreement opt-in, with full transparency. No punishment for withdrawal. Every clause reviewed, publicly logged, and simplified. For the first time in Council history. It wasn't written in legal abstraction. It was written in plain language. Because it wasn't just meant to function. It was meant to win Earth back. They delivered it directly. No intermediaries. No translation delay. A delegation arrived on Earth personally. High-ranking. Respectful. They presented the document with open hands. You asked for something better. We built it. For you. With you in mind. And for a moment, the galaxy held its breath. Because if Earth signed, everything might stabilize. The defectors might return. The system might survive. A new future might begin. The Council waited. 1 day. 2. Earth responded on the 3rd. No speech. No drama. Just a simple message, signed by Earth's planetary assembly. We acknowledge the effort. It is sincere, but we do not accept treaties from those who only seek us. When they fear they'll fall. Silence. The delegation stood there, frozen. Not in anger. In shock. Because this wasn't rejection for power. It wasn't ego. It was principle. Earth didn't want control. Didn't want guarantees. Didn't want to write the new rules. They just didn't trust the intent. Because good words written in a moment of panic aren't the same as truth held over time. The Council had reformed out of fear. But Earth? Earth had already moved on. They had built something else. A quiet network. A slow-growing alliance of mutual aid and unspoken rules. No flags. No signatures. Just trust. And they weren't going to give that up. Not for a treaty that came only after the system began to collapse. Because to Earth, the real test of peace isn't how you act when everything's falling apart. It's how you act before. They didn't isolate. That was the strangest part. After all the refusals, the silence, the treaties left and signed, Earth didn't retreat. They stayed present. Their ships still crossed trade routes. Their medics still responded to crises. Their relief convoys still arrived, faster than most. But when someone tried to bind them in ink, they said the same thing every time. We'll help, but not because we're obligated. Because it's right. And slowly, quietly, others began to follow. It wasn't a revolution. No flags were raised. No declarations made. Just a shift. More species began turning away from the central system. Not to destroy it. To move beyond it. They built new relationships. based not on signatures, but trust. Aid exchanged without enforcement. Defense agreements made with nothing but a handshake and a shared understanding. And somehow, it worked. Conflicts dropped. Trade stabilized. Small worlds, once overlooked, thrived. Because no one was being forced. Everything was a choice. And Earth? They never asked to lead. They just showed up, did the work, and left quietly, without asking for recognition. The Council remained. Smaller, quieter, still useful in some ways, but no longer set the tone. That belonged to Earth now. Not through power, not through policy, through presence. Because after everything, the speeches, the panic, the rewritten treaties, humanity had never been fighting the Council. They had simply refused to forget what peace actually means. It doesn't come from pressure. It doesn't come from fear. It comes from integrity, from the courage to say no, even when the rest of the galaxy is still pretending that yes is the only option. One ambassador, long retired from public life, summed it up best in a quiet interview. They didn't break the system. They just proved you never needed one in the first place. If you were willing to do the right thing without being told. And Earth? They just kept walking, helping when asked, defending when needed, leaving when they weren't wanted, and never once signing a treaty again. Because they didn't need paper to stand for something. They stood on memory, on principle, and on the belief that peace means more when you don't have to be forced to keep it. Final line, calm, honest human. We don't need signatures to know who we are. We remember, and that's enough.